So the topic is how to stay away from abstraction generalization towards the data vault model, or don't we? Don't are we just saying, yeah, you know what, abstraction generalization is a very good idea if you want to model for your data warehouse. And it's always happening when I want to move forward. That's it. The tree is not just on itself, right? It's just I was looking for some examples or some text on Google to say what about generalization, abstraction, what is in data modeling, what's being said over it, and I got the text saying some, yeah, it's representing like a tree with the branches outward, where the trunk of the tree is generalization and the branches are more abstraction, and the furthermore you go, more specific, further away from the actual generalization. So that was got me kind of thinking, okay, if this is what it is, what should we really looking for? How do we visualize that the data model? Where do we start? Are we looking for the tree itself, or the whole tree, or what part of the tree? What makes it that we want to model? And I got another information saying, okay, abstraction in data modeling. It says it's a design technique that focuses on the essential aspects of an entity, ignores or conceals less important or non-essential aspects. In other words, you know what? Let's do some abstraction on it and forget about everything which makes it specific. And we do it because it can simplify a lot of stuff, and it makes analysis, understanding really going to happen. We can understand data better when we're talking about an abstract or generalized level. And then the question is, in myself, what is essential and what is not essential? In other words, what do we really want to model in the end? So what is essential for us to still talk about, to understand what we're talking about, to say, yeah, for us, if we're talking about this part, then we still know what it is and it's important for us. And the same token, going a little bit further, you have to find a balance, right? What is making the tree, right? Is it the stem, the branch, the twig, the leaf, or everything together? And going back one. So if I'm looking at this picture over here, when do I say I have a tree? If I'm looking at my stem only, or do I need to include a couple of branches, or maybe some twigs, and maybe some leaves? When do we know that we're talking about a tree? So where's my balance? So what's my level of what I want to model in the end? And the same stuff. What are we talking about? Are we going to talk about, yeah, you know what? Let's look at the forest. And the forest, you see a whole bunch of trees, right? And there's some branches, and there are even some leaves. You can't even see the twigs anymore. Uh, or are we talking about the whole tree? And the fun part is, and of course, you already recognize the one. This picture of the tree is not just a tree; it's the elm tree. It's an elm tree, and probably know I'm all about elms, so I love my elm tree. But when I'm looking at that information, where do I keep the balance? Where do I start modeling? If I'm talking about a forest or a tree or an elm tree or the twigs or the branches, and to be honest, I really don't know. But I can give you some examples to say, yeah, this abstraction level, leaving out all the essential parts, are we going to do a little bit too far? And I'm going to talk to you about something what's happening to me personally. And one thing is that I had an appointment in a hospital with a doctor 2 years ago, and I was diagnosed with a groin rupture. I wouldn't recommend anybody to get a groin rupture. By the way, you can't do anything about it or prevent it. It's no fun. So, okay, I got an appointment in the hospital with a doctor. If I'm looking at this one and say, what if I'm going to try to get my model out of it? What do I see? Well, I see Remco, appointment, hospital, doctor diagnosis, groin rupture. If I would say, If I'm leaving out all the essential part and just abstract it and go for it, then I would say, what is Remco? Well, Remco is more or less a person. An appointment is more the event. Hospital is a place. Doctor, it's a person as well. Diagnosis could be a thing. Groin rupture, a thing as well. So, of course, knowing the elm, observation, knowing the notification, we will see that out of that I went to the hospital being diagnosed with that groin rupture. Uh, I would then say, you know what? I can model it on a very generalized level, abstracted level, as a person, event, place, person, thing. Which leads me to a model like this. Hey, I have an event and it's related to a thing. Actually, it should be related to two things. Uh, happens to be in a place and there are two persons involved. Uh, what does it tell me? Well, this is actually a very high abstracted generalized level of modeling. Can I explain this to people in the business if I'm going to, because let's be honest, a data model should be something you can use to communicate with business people, with people in the organization, what the organization is actually doing. But what does a model like this tell me? I don't know. You know what? Forget about this model. Let's do another example. Because after I got my diagnosis, I'm hospitalized and was put into bed in that hospital in a hospital room by a nurse. If I'm looking at this sentence, Remco, hospitalized, bed, hospital room, nurse, person, event, thing, place, person. Uh, This is the same model. What is it telling me? And how is this one different than the other one? How do I know that one model is talking about appointments and diagnosis and doctors and etc. And the other one is the actual being hospitalized and being put into bed and into a hospital room. I don't know about this model. I cannot go forward for this modeling. And I'm thinking, okay, if I need to make this a little bit more clear, if I'm going to use this model and going to talk to people in the business, I probably would say, yeah, you know what? Let's extend a little bit and just say, hey, uh, there are some events, and events can be of the type being hospitalized or being an appointment. And it's one or the other. So, but it's just generic. It's just an event. Oh, and that place, it's either the hospital or the hospital room. And in some cases, the event has a doctor's relationship to a person or a patient relationship to a person or whatever to a person, and a person can be a doctor, a nurse, or a patient or whatever, and that thing that could be the diagnosis or the bed or whatever. So I need to role play it and to type it to at least to be able to store all the information I want. But is it clear? Is this a clear model? Does it really tell the organization what's going on? If I'm going to show you this model, can you just say, oh, Remco, when I'm looking at this model, sure, this is all about hospitals and appointments and healthcare. Who can tell me this is all about healthcare? I don't think anybody can. It could also be all about finance or about logistics or about. So it is really not clear enough, this way of modeling, to go. So we are, and of course I exaggerate a little bit. I'm very high, I'm very generalizing and on a very abstract level, but it doesn't tell me anything. So I need to do something different. And what I need to do different, and Howard, by the way, I'm counting on you to keep track of questions and remarks, etc. Cool. Uh, so what makes it different? I'm going to use a different kind of thinking. And the first thing is, instead of just going forward, I'm just going to say, you know what? What if I can just go and write down just what I did in the front and at first. I just say Remco, appointment, hospital, doctor, diagnosis, groin rupture at my core Wisconsin. Apparently, in the example given, the case given, it's important enough for me to know this stuff. Uh, if I'm going to extend to Remco, hospitalized, bed, hospital room, nurse, etc., this is the one going forward. And now I think this is where Howard, where you came up to me with saying, "Hey, with Remco, you are doing the same stuff what I would do when I'm abstracting or generalizing." Because what you're going to do, you're going to say from each of the terms being given, what is it? Is it an event, a person, a place, a thing, or another concept, right? And when I'm looking at it, and this is what I do with people in the organization, when I'm going forward, I'm going to say, okay, let's move forward. For every term used, is an event, a person, a place, a thing, another concept. And they'll probably tell me on that Remco, yeah, it's an instance of a patient. It's not a person itself, but with it is the instance of the patient. So we probably need to add patient. Uh, just like a groin rupture, well, it's just one of the diagnoses we could have, right? You could go to hospital for many different things. Groin rupture is just one of them. So these are instances of diagnosis. So what we can do is just say, yeah, you know what? Let's add patient. There it is. Get these out of the way. Gray out Remco because it's just an instance of a patient, and a patient is a person. And groin rupture is an instance of a diagnosis. We already get the diagnosis. Is also left open. What is a bed? Who can tell me what a bed is? And Howard, I'm looking behind you, and you can say, yeah, this is a bed, right? But in a hospital, what's a bed in a hospital?
Yes.
Yes, sorry.
Okay, so I mean, a bed is going to be almost a place, or in some cases, it could be a thing. So it's either a place or a thing. A bed, a lot of times beds are allocated with rooms, and so it's a location, but
Yeah, that's
depends
exactly the
on.
thing. That's exactly what's going on, right? It is more than just a thing. It's more than just the physical stuff where you lie on. It has more to it. It gives you a lot of discussion. I recently, by the way, not only being hospitalized and being helped for groin rupture. By the way, twice. Don't do it, and don't do it twice. So that's even worse. Uh, but also I was in a hospital in a healthcare center couple of weeks ago, and we were talking about beds, and then simple enough. And we were with more IT people, and they said, yeah, it's a thing. And there was one guy said, yeah, but sometimes it's not a thing. Sometimes it's a place. It's related to the actual plate where the bed is being set. And there's more to it. I'm coming to that one. Most important thing is that what we do in L modeling for data vault, doing a little bit more lower, it is not abstraction of all the terminology. So don't think that we can use then abstraction levels, but they're categorizations. We are going to categorize. And the reason why we categorize is that we can, per category, just say, is an appointment and being hospitalized, they're both events, are they the same, yes or no? Now, they're completely different events. Is a doctor, a nurse, and a patient, is it really being seen as the same, yes or no? Because we are putting them all in the category of a person, yes or no. And yes, as an instance of a doctor could also be an instance of a patient. The same an instance of a nurse could be an instance of a patient. So the actual physical carbon life person could be more than one role, but from a modeling perspective, a doctor, a nurse, and a patient are really different. So they are different business concepts. So that's why we are using the categorization. And the thing on bad is, what we need to do is to just, because you get the discussion when you're going to ask for what is it, a place or a thing, and you get the discussion in healthcare at least. And then you get something like, okay, what is a bed? I just took a picture out of Google with a hospital, and you can say, yeah, you know what? This actually is a bed, a physical bed. There's a mattress on it, there are wheels on it, there is whatever on it. That's my bed. And some person said, yeah, but you know what? The bed is not just the physical one, but it should include the physical space, including where we could hook up monitors and oxygen and all that kind of stuff. So it's a place, right? So it's not a thing. This should be a thing. This is a place. And other people say, yeah, you know what? It is the place in the hospital where a bed can be situated or even not be situated, but it should be staff available. We should have someone watching multiple beds. So we should have staff available. If we don't know that one, uh, uh, we can't do anything with it. So there should be staff. So then that for me is a bed. And other people says, yeah, but wait a minute. In the hallway, there could also be extra outlets for oxygen, extra places for monitors, for as a extra place to situate the bed. So that's for me a bed. And you can say, why is this all important? And the reason why it's important for them is for the calculation. Say, we need to know what the availability is in our hospital. And the availability is depending not only on how many beds are occupied, yes or no, physical beds are occupied, but also how much staff is available, yes or no. And in the discussion they came up with, yeah, but wait a minute, this extra information on the hallway, yeah, you know what? We don't call that a bed anymore. We're not taking it into the calculation, which can mean that we have an occupation of 120% in our hospital, because all the beds within a room, if they're occupied, it's 100%, and the extra beds on the hallway make the occupation a little bit bigger. If they are not occupied on the hallway, we don't count them in as they are still available. It's just extra space we need to count in. On the staff, they said, well, you need to have 2 people per room to be able to have, in this case, 4 beds available. So if I only have 1, my room suddenly drops down from 4 beds available to 2 beds available. And if 2 beds are occupied, we are at 100% occupants. So we should do something about it. We should know that information. This is also why we should have business involvement to tell us to what is going on, what's the process. It doesn't just say or help us to say, you know what, we are just going to model a place or a thing, and then we can add roles to it and types to it, and then we can model everything, regardless if it's the physical one or if it's the physical, the physical, the place, or if there's a staff, yes or no. We should know it. And by the way, this is also a fun one, because we end up saying we have a bed, which is a place, and there could be a physical bed, or can be out. It can be without a bed. And again, when I was in the hospital, I was lying on the bed, and at a certain moment in time, you have to go to the operating room, right, to the theater, which means that they're going to take you with bed and all out of the room towards the preparation room for getting your surgery going. And I still know that if I'm going to get, well, let's do the last one, because I was lying at the window side. When you rolled out, this place is still called a bed. There was no physical bed anymore, but it was still a bed with full occupants. Why? Because it was the place I need to be brought back to when I was coming out of surgery. How do we know? We only know it because we are going to talk about on a level that we modelers understand and that the business people can help us. Is this the right way to do it? Yes or no? In the end, this is where we came up with. We called it a physical bed, which was a thing, the actual thing you're lying on, right? And that was purely for maintenance because it had a barcode. Because if the wheel drops off or whatever, maintenance should know exact which physical bed they need to take care of. Housekeeping needs to know which actual physical bed, regardless where it is, they need to service. And he said, you know what? And we forget about the staff for now. That's a different calculation, but just the location where a bed normally could be located with oxygen, access to oxygen and monitors, that's what we actually in this hospital call a bed. And now the fun part is, if I'm going to take this not on the what we call the categorization, the abstract level into your model, you come up with a model something like this. And now I would say this pretty much makes sense, right? Hey, I see that I have an appointment where there's a doctor in place, there's a patient needed, there's a diagnosis being held, there's a hospital where the appointment is, and that patient being hospitalized in a room, lying on a bed, which by the way has a physical bed and with a nurse. This model, I would say, really helps me to explain to people in the organization, to business people, about the business process. If you see this model now, nobody's thinking about, is it a financial institution if I'm looking at the model, or is it logistic? We see stuff we can relate to. We see terminology people understand. So instead of looking at the whole forest at once or at the whole tree, we are looking at what makes it for us that we know it is a tree, right? We know where we need to be. We are going to take all the essential stuff and still model it one. We don't go too deep. Again, I'm not going to say, oh, groin rupture, shoulder dislocation, knee operation, whatever kind of diagnosis you want to have. No, then you're going way too deep. And at the same token, we can say all those stuff, groin rupture, shoulder dislocation, knee injury, whatever, is just a diagnosis, a specific one. And it might be that we have different kind of treatments, which is not in here, by the way, the whole treatment stuff, but it's just a diagnosis and a treatment. And maybe for some people, we need to know more than just a treatment, right? Is it a long-term treatment or not, or whatever? So there are different ways of telling, and it's always a thing. You need to find a balance somewhere. Yeah, I think
Remco,
it's easy to communicate and clear what it is. Yes.
so just to confirm this understanding, in the diagnosis, you've actually abstracted or generalized the groin or the different diagnosis into one table, whereas you've avoided that abstraction or generalization in terms of doctor, patient, nurse, person type of scenario. So
Yeah.
in some cases you have, in some cases you haven't. So you haven't been consistent. And could you explain why you are not consistent?
Well, one, of course, this is simplified stuff, but you're completely right, right? If I'm looking at diagnosis, I kind of abstracted at a level where everybody understands what it is and it's good enough to know.
Okay.
But if I would say doctor, patient, and nurse, you know what? Let's do just person.
All right.
Instead of
Okay.
then you I need to add a role to it, right? Because let's be honest, a person can be a doctor, a person can be a patient, a person can be a nurse, could be all three over time.
Right.
Whereas a diagnosis, right? A diagnosis, if I go one level deeper on diagnosis, it's the actual diagnosis itself. It's really the instant of diagnosis. If I go one level deeper on person, I see all the different roles of that person, right? A person could have.
Okay.
If I go one level deeper on a patient, I get the actual instance of a patient, and it's not an easy thing. I had this morning. I had a call with someone working for a I think it was a financial institution, and he had no, it was not financial. He had the same stuff because it was all about assets, and said, okay, if I have an asset, but an asset could be a generator, and a generator includes a pump and some liners and some bolts and screws. Am I going to model assets, which everybody, well, the especially the more financial people in the organization were talking about assets, whereas the maintenance people are talking about the generators. And when they do the actual maintenance, they're not managing generator, but they're going into the pump of the generator and could replace the pump of the generator, which has its own information. So it was all about he already found out that there will be a skew in abstraction level. We are going to talk about in that case about assets. At the same
Yeah.
token, apart from modeling assets, they also modeled, and one of the assets, by the way, was software, right? So they had, I'm going to do it over there, asset, and they had software, and they had equipment. And on the equipment, they had a whole bunch of generators, etc., etc., etc. And generator was the whole stuff. And it said, probably we're going to, well, for the real financial people, we will have a business concept called asset. We will have software as a business concept because underneath software, there might be some information, but the way the organization is talking about it is just on software level. Nobody was talking about equipment. It's there. It's a level. If you go down the hierarchy, it's a level in the abstraction level, right? It's equipment, but all was talking about the generators, etc., etc., etc. And there, of course, there's a pump needed in there. And he said, for sure, we're going to use generator and all the other parts of equipment, and probably have some other equipment as a more like, okay, these are just some leftover part, but this is where we're going to discuss about it. And if I'm going to really going into downstream maintenance part, I might even add pumps to it. Not the bolts and the screws I'm going to use, but pump, yeah, that might be something as well. So you see, it's a very skewed level of business concept looking at the hierarchy tree on this one, the generalization tree, right? And
Okay.
it's okay. If the business is talking about assets, software as an aspect of assets, and they're talking about generators, and sometimes they even talk about pumps, then this is what the business will tell us is making clear, and we can model that one. And we are using their terminology. So we can also explain to them, just like we have doctor, patient, and nurse, and bed and physical bed, we can explain to them with the model what's going on, what you're telling us in your organization. This is how your organization is running. So uh, the model is helping you to communicate what's going on instead of you saying, yeah, I know they're talking about generators, but if we are talking about software, we need to talk about equipment and forget about everything underneath. Yeah, no, not so much. We really need to talk in the terminology they're using.
Good.
Yeah.
Now we've actually got some questions on the sideline, and I'm feeling that the answer that you've just given applies to them as well. Where the question was, Well, what about the different types of rooms? Is the hallway a room? Is a operating theater a general room? A cardiac? Are these all rooms? And I'm assuming you're going to say the same thing there as to what you said with diagnosis and room.
Absolutely, and again, I would, by the way, I would definitely again, I try to simplify my model as much as I can.
Sure.
Yeah, sure. I would say on room, I might want to say I have a room or area or whatever, and maybe there's some level in between called hospital room, meaning the actual room where beds are going to be are situated where patients are lying down. So it's not the common room, it's not the operating room, not the theater, because the theater is something different. It's all to do with surgery, so that's a different location. So, but again, it is more like how you're talking about that information.
Right. And maybe if I could just ask Paul, and Paul, is that answering your question?
Yeah, I think the original question was by Cachet.
Yes, I know. Are you comfortable with the answer in terms of when to generalize and abstract?
Yeah. Actually, Remco, you made me think the original question that Howard asked about the inconsistency and so on. That was quite interesting to kind of go down until you get an instance. And you're right, it's not always going to be that easy to determine and whatnot. But as I said here in the comments as well, I think we can get very tied up in the technicalities of how to model it, but then we forget the reason why we're doing something. So if you're developing a generic system that you want to apply in many contexts, great, then abstraction is fantastic. But it comes with a lot of issues if you try to use that to explain something to a user, or actually just to make an application work in a certain context, because you need to then on the application layer deal with the different roles and so on, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you, Howard.
We have, and to make it, and then I'm going further to the discussion we are getting, right? I'm kind of reading it, but maybe it helps. In our Datavault training, we have one slide, and it's all talk about, especially on that one, right? What's the level we want to do? And there are some one of the terminology over there being used, and by the way, that's not the level we normally would model, is to say there's a 12-month secured fixed interest balloon payment loan. It's a very, very specific kind of loan. But probably if you're talking to the people in the organization, everybody just hear the whole 12-month secured interest fixed balloon payment loan, and they're talking about, yeah, you're just talking about a loan. So we model loan, right? And I think that's the typical thing we need to do. If I'm talking about a bed or a physical bed or whatever, everybody in the organization needs to understand what it is. Right? If we're talking about a bed, that even people with maintenance, which are only using physical beds, they need to understand if they're talking about a bed in the organization, that's the place where we can locate our physical bed if there is a patient on the bed, yes or no. It's all about getting the discussion going, and I don't mind abstraction to a certain level, or generalizations to a certain level. But as soon as I'm going to add roles and types to it, then I'm going to halt, because then I need to look at the data to understand what I'm looking for. As soon as I see complete instances only, because if I'm not modeling doctors, well, let's do doctor a little bit less than other, but I model Dr. A, Dr. B, C, etc., etc. So I model on that level, right? The actual doctors themselves. Yeah, it really doesn't make sense to go on that level. So you probably want to say, yeah, you know what? We're not going to have the instance of the doctor model because they're all doctors. We just do doctor. And some doctors are pediatric, some doctors are general, some doctors are whatever. But we need to do a little bit better. Yeah.
Could I ask you a question? I know John O'Gorman's on the chat. John, I'm not sure if you can talk. The last time you had a problem with your mic, and I know John O'Gorman has the Q6 framework, which is very much in terms of the categorization you presented, but more levels of detail. And I'd be interested to hear John's view on building that model, because I think he comes more from an ontology point of view. John, what's your view on this generalization and this approach?
Yeah, no, I think Remco is. Thanks, Howard. Remco's got it right. It's all about finding the balance between the level of abstraction and how deep your instances show up. I would model these concepts in blue slightly differently, but that's, like you say, the Q6 model is all about separation of concerns. So, for example, doctor, patient, and nurse are roles, as you diagrammed earlier. The tricky parts with concepts like bed and physical bed. What Q6 does is takes bed at face value. It's interesting because when I say a bed, I'm referring to a physical thing. When I use the word bed in Q6, it's a functional class. It's a functional value. So it's the same as like a cardiac, or say an operating theater is a functional class of a physical space. So the only qualifier there that I would have, because I like this, I really like this, where you start out with a very general model. It doesn't mean anything to anybody. Although, Remco, I was going to interject and say, well, it's really cool that the general model applies to almost every situation where you have an event and a person. Do you know what I mean? And that's valuable in its own right.
Yeah.
But it doesn't tell the business anything specific about what they're trying to accomplish. So, kudos to you. So that's valuable. I think these kinds of models and stuff where you look at functional class, these are all concepts, right? So functional classes, location classes. I mean, a bed, I winced a bit when you, like, bed is a location. There's a different, I separate, the bed, the physical bed has a location, but bed is not a location, and it doesn't belong in that class. But that's me and the Sesame Street model. But that's a matter of pragmatic with your customer, right?
Yeah,
Because you can,
and absolutely. And these are the terms, by the way. They're using the term bed
Yeah.
For actually the location where a physical bed could be situated, and there's oxygen, etc. So that
Right.
was
Yep.
their terminology, and I try to refer to that one. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's the push and pull of it with clients, and they have to be comfortable both with the language and then how they see their language relating. So, for example, in the diagram, I would put bed up next to room. But again, it's what your clients become comfortable with. Yeah, I know that, and the shrug is important because it's sort of like, okay, I've had some interesting debates recently in LinkedIn about a whole bunch of other esoteric stuff, whether a concept is a real thing. Okay.
Right.
I mean, but I can't have those discussions with anybody else but people in this room, this virtual room, because clients don't care if I think it's a real thing or not. They just want to know, how do I organize my data so that I can make it accessible and findable and fair and all that kind of stuff. So that's what I have to say about that. Thanks, Howard, for asking.
Thanks, John.
By the way, I think that you're right. Right. You could also say, hey, I have a room. There's a hospital room that might be very specific, and the hospital room, the bed as a physical location is in the hospital room. So, yeah, you might want to add that relationship as well.
But again, that's business driven. Business must lead you in that thing. Then one question that Ross asked, which is very interesting, is this sort of may go against, and Ross was referring to an industry data model. Now, it uses lots of generalization in that scenario, and almost when one would look at, well, how do you comply with the and again, we must know that industry data model, you don't just take it and force your business to look like it. You take it and then build your enterprise data model from the industry data model, right? And then you may have some collisions there and challenges with an industry data model that's saying this is the way we see a bed or a.
Yeah, and the thing is, I like the remark on industry levels of models or reference models, right? And what you're saying is absolutely right. You use them more as an inspiration for your own organization, right? That's more like it. I know that I once worked for a company and I started to work with SAP. And SAP just said, oh, you're a brewery and this is how you look like. So you have to adjust your whole organization to what we say that a brewery is working, how the brewery is working.
Right.
And I still have this, I have the same idea with industry models or reference models say, we take it up and we thought about it very, very thoroughly. And this is how you in the industry are working. So take this model and you might want to adjust a little bit, but this is how you're working. And what ended up happening, and that's why people are using it as inspiration and adjusting it to their own liking, to their own culture, to their own organization, to their own terminology, because that's what's happening, right? People are not going to, well, most organizations are not going to adjust their way of working, their culture, their organization to how the industry reference model says that they need to work, or that SAP or other big vendors say this is how you work as an organization. I saw it happening. I saw organization really trying to adjust to what SAP was saying. This is how it works, and it fails hopelessly. And the reason why is you have to do with the culture and of the organization. You have to do with history of the organization, right? They are different. It's the same with why people are using reference models as inspiration, because let's be honest, if you are Commonwealth Bank or ABN AMRO or Rabobank or JP Morgan or whatever, any big financial bank in the world, whatever, they are all could all refer to the same financial reference industry model, but they're only referencing it and using it as some kind of inspiration because they're all different from each other. If they were not different from each other, then why do we have different banks if they're all the same? So, yes, I like the idea of industry models. I like the idea of reference models, but the same for me. There is always the balance, and I think this nice little drawing over there ends up right on a reference model as well. We have in this case, an asset. Asset breaks down into certain levels, and I always say, what is the level people are talking about, and still understand what we're talking about, because if I would tell you, hey, we have an involved party having an arrangement with a resource item with our person, whatever, it's very generic, but it doesn't tell anything. And you still have to say in terminology used by the organization to know what it is. And I know that people like to say, yeah, but we have rules for that one. And I always say, well, if I'm looking at a model, for me, a model is also for communication. Communication to not only to the techie people, but also to business people. And if I need to dive into what kind of different roles do I have on a person, what kind of different types of rooms do I have, for instance, if I need to dive into that one, and wow, it's important for me, then I'm modeling at the wrong level, because I think a model should be clear on its own. And not saying that I can't do event, thing, person, place, and relate everything together and add roles and types to it, because I can store everything on it. Sure. And I need to look into the data to understand what I'm talking about. But I'd rather have a model which is, for me, completely clear. And Goshet, yes, do you need a business glossary as a start? I'm just picking one out, which I'm seeing right now. Preferably, yes, but knowing me, and just by the way, I have the complete PDF out of the slides working. Our whole Elm process is a set of certain certain templates, which, by the way, are available if you want to as well. And this is the first part. And of course, every single item in here, which we are identified as event, person, place, thing, maybe something else, has to have a a description, and you should have a definition. It should have attribution to it. So it should be relating to a full business glossary. If you're looking at our approach, what we are doing at this moment, and this stuff, I'm not making a lot of commercial activities. I don't have any information on that one. If you go and look for Ellie.ai, I think it's AI for Finland. Ellie is a business glossary tool that say themselves it's a business modeling tool. I like the business glossary part, and they actually incorporated all our templates into their tool, or adjusted that what they have in the tool with our templates, whatever comes first. And it's really helpful for people to understand the business glossary and helping out for modeling.
Thank you. I think I think it's important to start off with that, so that will help the bedroom debate also from the beginning, because that's that's where your kind of your master data is, and you also need to understand basically what is the business about. So, for example, this business is about the patient. So patient should actually be the I'm not sure if you want to call it in the snowflake model, it's the core part. And then the hospital is maybe not. So, but it depends on how you approach it, and then the abstraction and the generalization is kind of the balance that you strike between the two. Different frameworks, maybe like we previously saw something like the Goldilocks. So the Goldilocks is something maybe good for Coke and Pepsi and industries like that. And maybe this kind of approach is suitable for a medical environment. And there's similar approaches that you can have for a mining environment, where the bed is similar to an equipment, which is kind of, you get a pump and you get a whatever, and then the equipment is a place in the ground, a plant, and that equipment can be moved around from one shop to a different shop. So, that's also kind of thing similar to a patient. So, there's so many approaches, but this is excellent. I appreciate this.
Yeah, thank you very much, and I'm really happy that you can see the benefit out of it, and it will help you. And again, I have a whole bunch more slides with explaining the template, but I'm going to give it to Debbie and Howard to share. It's just PDF the hell out of it, and you can use it. You can also link with me, and we can set up separate calls if you need it. What I was trying to do, and I think it was interesting enough, and thank you again, Howard, for getting me on this road for getting this particular presentation going on abstraction, generalization versus not, because it helps me as well in my whole thinking. And I completely agree, Paul, with you that hey, there are not many people we can discuss this kind of stuff with. So it's always good to or John, I think, was to have a good community of people where we can get into this kind of discussion. And there's no one way to do to come to an end result, or to help out our companies we're working for, or the organization we're working for. And I was looking, when I was starting out on the whole stuff on okay, because I'm a data vault modeler, I want to model logical data models, and I need to find a way on that one. I looked at all different kind of modeling approaches, and I think, is it for me a match to what I want to achieve? And they all had something, but I need to adjust. And I was just thinking, you know what? It's not good enough for me to have an approach which I can almost use, but I need to adjust it to go to a logical data model which is fit for any ensemble modeling pattern or data vault modeling pattern. So that's why we come up with this approach, where we said, for us, it's all good about event, person, place, thing, other concept. I know that there are also people which says, well, if you look at the event, there are three or four different kind of events. If you look at person, there are whatever, and they come up with, I think, 26 different categories. But if I'm going into 26 different categories, which is very, very helpful from especially from a business glossary and data governance perspective, if I would go into discussion with business people, is this person internal, external, whatever, then I'm going to have so much discussion in which bucket a term is going to fall. And that's way too much for me. I just want to say, you know what? I have my 5, sometimes 6 buckets. Organization could be another one I can add. 5, 6 buckets, that's it. And within this 5, 6 buckets, I can just see that if something falls in the same bucket as the other thing, I can look into it. They fall in the same bucket for us as an organization, as this particular organization. Do we mean the same? Yes or no? Because that's the only thing you want to have important, right? Is a doctor the same as a nurse? Or I saw ward, which is maybe a better name for the person watching over in a hospital room. Is a nurse and a ward, are they the same? Yes or no? Because they're both person. Let's put ward over there. I'm very flexible. And if they are, then what term are we going to use? Well, in this case, Remco, I think ward is a better name than nurse. So we're going to use ward and ward on this one, and nurse is just a synonym. And that's where our business glossary comes in place as well. We just call it a synonym for ward. Because some part of the organization or who doesn't know the right wording yet, they're calling it nurse. Cool. Then we go to model ward instead of nurse. I'm completely fine with that one. It doesn't help when you are going to have too many buckets, because then there are probably not too much into compare if it's the same yes or no.
And I think Remco, there's a nice summary from Manj that I like this approach as well. So she basically says is you walk into this elicitation of concepts with an open mind, and you're getting your cues from the business. But if you're going in there with too much of a rigid layout and model, you're going to hamstring the discovery process.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that, by the way, for us modelers, right, data people, I think that's the hardest part to do, right? Especially when you are going from one organization to the other organization, to keep your open mind and don't get any prejudice on modeling, right? Let's be honest, if you've seen one organization and you have to model for another organization in the same line of business, you kind of know what they're doing. At the same time, you have to be open-minded because you never know what terminology they're going to use. You always have to be
right.
Yeah, and I like to do this kind of work, right, in workshops, get people into preferably physical room or do it online and get people going and start using it. And the templates I'm using, by the way, are one, they're completely free to use. You have to register, but on our website, but they're free to use, and you're not going to get any spam from my side, so don't worry. Or from any other commercial organization, but we just want to know who's using what where. The templates are Excel based, and they're kind of, some people say, well, why don't you make it out of the tool? Well, one, Excel is for me the best I can do in tooling. The other one is I got people like Marco Wobber we had, I think 3 weeks ago.
Yes, that's right. Last week,
He's using my template, my Excel template, to read it into KStalk.
Right.
So it's really easy and open for everybody to just adjust and to go into that one.
Okay, so we got a question from Gachet or Dai. Let's just get the one from Dai first. Dai, yes, a question from you.
Hi, thank you, Howard, and thank you so much, Remco. Great presentation. I just have one question. What do you think is the big benefit from generalization and or abstraction? Is it understanding? Is it flexibility? Is it reusability?
I think that generalization abstraction is definitely the big benefit out of it is reusability and easier for tech people to store data without changing the data model. So I think it is a way to say, hey, if I'm just modeling person instead of patient, doctor, nurse, and ward, but I'm using person, I'm going to generalize. It's easy to just say whatever comes in, because the next time people comes in and say, yeah, we also have a maintenance guy. Well, it's also a person, so let's just put it into the person there. We don't have to adjust our data model. So generalization abstraction will help maintaining a more steady data model. At the same token, I always tell people, whenever we do generalized information, when you go too general, too abstract, right? You need to make sure that what the data you get in will fit in your generalized or abstract bucket. So you might want to add a type and a role to it when you're loading it to understand what it is. And when you want to get the data out, you have to filter in it to say, oh, out of my person table, I only want to see the patients, or I only want to see the doctors, or I only want to see. So I always need to filter on it. So it's hard. It's from a physical data model perspective, it's easy because you hardly ever have to change your data structure at all. But loading it and reading it is really not very easy. And especially when you are looking at the data model to try to understand it, I wouldn't go there. But it's a balance, right? It's with everything. It's the balance in life. It's the balance in data modeling.
Thank you, Remco.
Yeah, you're very welcome. And Gaucher, on your data modeler and business analyst working together, and data engineers even, I'd like to, when I do a workshop, and I'm most of the time when I do a workshop, I'm the facilitator, so I would say the easy role. I want to have as many business-oriented people in, business analysts as well, but business people in that workshop. And data engineers and data modelers, yeah, for sure. But for me, the more IT-driven people are more helping out me as a facilitator and listening in, than really helping me to understand what we're talking about. Because, and I've been to a lot of, I did this session once with an organization, and there was the data modeler. And after this one, you had to fill in the business glossary, right? To fill in the definitions of what's a hospital, what's a doctor, was diagnosed, etc. in the business glossary. And the data modeler did all the definitions. So she filled in all the definitions for everything in the business glossary. And then she sent out to the business people, do you agree with the definition I wrote down? And the thing is that then business people are just not saying anything at all. Probably they just say, well, you're working here for 20 years, whatever, so you should know it, so it should be okay. Or only give, yeah, it's good. And the thing is, I want to have the people from the organization, the business people, really engaged at all times. So I kind of give them as a homework, fill in the definition to get them used to be able to help out us on getting the data model going. And I don't want laptops in for looking at database systems or looking up for data, looking up for reports. Because if you have to look into a report or a database to understand what your organization, how your organization is working, what business concepts are important for you, then I think you're going it from a too technical perspective.
Maybe thanks for that. Just some few comments. What I understand is, so for me, the objective for any project is to get the business to understand the business itself.
Mm-hmm.
So one of the things is, I think as data persons, we need to facilitate that to get that information out of it. So the experience that I had previously is that we get there's two important roles, and maybe they are summed up as a data engineer lately. But firstly, you get the the business analyst in to understand the business process and understand what is this thing about. From there on, you would maybe identify some data definition starting there. So you will have your procurement department, you will have your whatever. So you'll identify the high level stuff maybe, and that is already something that the data modeler can start working on and building concepts on that. And so yes, I hear what you say, and I agree with that. But I think there's some. I think the most important thing is those workshops, engaging with the people. Rather before the time as after the time, and someone said, no, but I didn't say this. But then you come back to a signature because you've got a business owner that comes back and said, but you signed off, this is the business glossary. So if they then complain against that, then you've got the business owner to fight your battles for you.
Yeah, and that's what you really want. And by the way, I definitely don't disagree on what you're saying, right? But if I'm going into workshop, whenever I'm going to, well, and I'm the easy one, right? I'm high paid, so people think, hey, we bring in Remco, so it should be important, so I make time for him. That's one thing. The other thing is I'm always new into an organization, so I can always be, hey, I'm new, I need to know what's going on. And when I'm doing a workshop, and oh, by the way, coming from the Netherlands, I try to bring stroopwafels with me to any workshop to lure people in as well, and just write down while they're telling me what is going on. This is the only thing I'm writing down, or have someone writing down on a whiteboard, or whatever. Just all the terms I hear while they're talking. They're talking about, hey, Remco has an appointment in the hospital with a doctor has a diagnosis of a groin rupture. Just while they're going, we write the words down because they are telling me about their organization. So it's already in their own wording. That's why I think it's so important to show it directly. And that's why I love to be in a room with big whiteboards to get the thing going. And after that, then I'm going to just add, and maybe in the first workshop or maybe in the second one, say, hey, these would have, and then I'm going to add down, okay, if these are all terms we use, let's try to categorize them. Let's try to see if we are going to say, is this an event, a person, a place, a thing, or maybe something else we think it's important. And just step by step by step by step. And you can't go from knowing nothing to a full-grown logical data model in one workshop of 2, 3, 4 hours. It takes 3 workshops at least. And every workshop is 2 to 3 hours. Why? Well, one thing, the definitions and the thinking in between should be done as well. And people need to take time, and it can be very intense. And yeah, but it's the fun part. And the lucky for me is that no organization, no workshop is the same. So that's always a good part. And I see, Paul, your information about technical hands-on person part of data modeling as well. Yes, sure. I will definitely look at any given moment in time, and sometimes even upfront. I will definitely want to see the data. Or what I also want to do, and that's one of the things in a follow-up workshop where I'm looking more at relationships. I will definitely need to have some kind of idea about what is the data. If I'm going to this Paul one, if I'm going to say, hey, there's a relationship apparently between appointment and doctor. Can you give me some examples of data of that relationship between appointment and a doctor? Oh, is Dr. A having an appointment on Tuesday? Is Dr. whatever? So to get some kind of idea, am I on the right level of modeling? Am I on the right level of my relationship? But my first part, and that's what I'm trying to bring in, is really just to get to know the organization, know the business concept, and know the buckets that I fall into. That if I'm going to achieve that in one workshop, I'm already completely happy. And sometimes I make some drawings and I add some stuff to make stuff more clear. This first draft of a model, hardly in my first workshop. Second workshop, maybe, if I'm focusing more on relationships.
Yeah, I agree with you. And while I, especially the initial workshops, it's just conversation, it's just conceptual level. I'm a big fan of that. And even if you do then bring in the let's just call it, maybe let's call that person a data analyst. If you use that person in that context, it's not about really understanding the core concepts. It's actually just it's almost like bumping people on into the right lane. I almost want to say. So you do that later, and I've got a couple of examples recently where we had to model something and completely conceptual at first, but after a while, people in the meeting got stuck, sort of on the same business level, and it helped when we actually looked at, okay, but what do we have in the current systems? How does it actually work to just dislodge that conversation? And it did cause us to actually make adjustments to the models. It's not on this level, it's admittedly maybe a level or two down. But I agree with you. I do think it's very helpful to have them, but especially in these first initial stages, it's more to to bump people onto the right track as opposed to helping with the core definitions, because that should come from the business and they should know it good enough.
And again, so it helps for sure. What I also do is on that works when I see that people are kind of getting off-faced, or well, you need to bump them in the right track, or need to be more. I'm just going to say, hey, so if I understand everything, I have a doctor, and he is looking at a patient, whatever. So I'm going to make a drawing, and that's, by the way, on a certain schedule, certain date, and whatever. So I'm going to make some drawings next to it if I see that people are kind of getting stuck. And the only reason why I do that kind of drawing, and again, nobody understands what the drawing is if I'm afterwards, if they were not part of the workshop, because I'm asking people, this is what I get out of what you're telling me. And then they say, yeah, but before you get the appointment, there should be whatever. So they're going to add to that one. So not only look at the actual data, what's being done in the organization, what's coming in, but I also find it very helpful to, apart from there, just give some drawings, make some information going, and just talk about it. And my experience is, I was trying to learn how to draw beautiful and to make very clear and understanding drawings. And I really found out that it doesn't matter how you draw, as long as you do something to make it clear to people, to shoot, to say, well, you have it completely wrong, because it's the other way around. It's the patient making an appointment for a doctor, or whatever information you get out of it. It's the same with the, I'm not doing that one, but if I would do the generator, pump, and its asset kind of stuff, I would also say, well, you have a generator, right? And in the middle here, there's a pump. Is this pump really separate from the generator? Yes or no? Yeah, we can replace it. It has a whatever. Cool. Then it's something on its own. But what happens if I'm replacing the pump, and I'm replacing the lines, and I'm replacing the gauges or the meters, or whatever? I replace everything, even the plating on the outside. Are we still talking about the same generator, or is it a complete new generator at a certain moment in time? Making the drawings make it also clear for people to understand what they're talking about. It's all about communication. And again, there's no just one way to get to the end result and the best result for our organization we're working for.
Remco, thank you very much. I just want to check, is there any last set of questions for Remco about his approach? Remco, there's lots of compliments to say, well done, thank you very much. But just want to check, are there any final questions before we close?
Then I have one final one. Thank everybody for attending and engaging really, really much. I was anticipating when I was discussing this with, or looking at this with Hans, I said, I have 33 slides. I said, I don't think I'm going to be passing slide number 14. So I was already anticipating this one.
Fantastic. Normally I have 100 and I don't get past 20.
Yeah, they always want better than
Howard.
Howard. So yeah.
Howard, that's not true. Sometimes you don't get past slide number 1.
Yes, that's true. That's true.
Remco, just an offline question. What did you say your dad show you bring something into the classroom? What was that?
Sorry?
You said when you go into a classroom, you bring something because your dad's. What is that you brought? That you said?
Stroopwafels.
Oh, stroopwafels. Okay. That sounds lekker.
They are very good. Sometimes I also bring licorice, but not everybody likes licorice.
Yeah.
Fantastic.
Yes, it's an acquired taste.
It's a very much acquired taste. Yes.
Some people call them donut meetings. Remco calls them stroopwafels.
Yeah, I started off with the secret of donuts, but I'm going to rephrase everything to the secret of stroopwafels.
Fantastic.
Howard and I needed to learn the hard way in Saudi that people there don't like nougat, Howard. So we were buying chocolates and nougat for them, just to kind of dish out as we teach and